People are still entering the room, but welcome to our statewide CAN webinar on voter engagement. I'm excited to spend the next hour with you. This is a really exciting time for our country, for our state. It's exciting and a little trying at the same time, but I am so grateful to, as I said, spend the next hour with you. We've got some great people on this call today who are doing so much to engage the electorate in this state, and I'm grateful for their time joining us today. If this is your first time joining a webinar with NC Child, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Skiba, and I'm the Voter Engagement Specialist here at NC Child. And we are going forth in voter engagement this election season, and we are partnering with nonprofits across the state to engage unlikely voters to come out and vote in this election. That's something that I'm really proud of, something that I'm really excited about, bringing the voices of all North Carolinians to the polling place on election day. So I know as you join us, you are probably representing a nonprofit organization who may be thinking about engaging in this work. So I'm hoping that you come away from this webinar today, this training, with some resources, some tools that you can take back to your organization and the work that you plan on doing with voter engagement. The name of this webinar is How to Help Your Clients and Members Vote This Fall. Again, this is a very important time to make sure that all voices are heard. You're going to hear quite a few things that you may have questions about voter protection and mobilization and other forms of engagement. So if you do have any questions during this webinar, I invite you to use the Q&A box. You'll see at the bottom of your screen. And if you look in the chat box, you'll find email addresses for me and the panelists that are joining me today. You'll also find links to some resources that we're going to mention in the chat as well. In this webinar, we're going to talk about voter education, voter mobilization and protection. We'll also have some info that NC Child produces in our NC Child County data cards. These are great touch points to get facts about your county that you can use to help educate the electorate in your area and just empower your clients with information that is pertinent to some of the things they may be facing day to day. And we'll also talk about some nonprofit do's and don'ts. These are just some basic things that you can keep in mind when you start voter engagement with your organization that can give you some confidence to make sure that you are doing what you're supposed to do and not doing what you should not be doing as a nonprofit organization. Today, we have, as I said, some really great people who are doing this work. We have Caitlin Metzguer, who is the Deputy Director of You Can Vote. We also have with us Cheryl Ellis, the Organizing Director for Democracy NC. We have our very own Whitney Tucker, who is Policy Director here at NC Child. And then myself, Skiba, the Voter Engagement Specialist here at NC Child. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now so Caitlin can jump in and tell us a little bit more about voter education. Caitlin?
Hey y'all, good afternoon. I am going to share my screen and share some information with you today. Thank you so much for allowing us to take time to be here together. And does that look good? You can see that?
Yeah, that looks great.
All right, so as mentioned, you can have all of my contact information. It'll be towards the end as well, but I just want to take a brief minute to introduce myself. I am Caitlin Metzguer with You Can Vote. Our mantras this year are know your rights, make your plan, vote 2020. The make your plan part I know is complicated for a lot of people, and so we might talk about having a backup plan because there's some moving pieces. But I want to take the next couple minutes to talk about the most important thing you can do, which is register to vote. So the great news is that in North Carolina, we do have partial online voter registration. And so I'm going to walk you through that and then tell you about how to do it if you don't have a DMV ID, which is okay. Very briefly, for folks who might be new to this or just need a quick reminder, in order to register, in order to vote in North Carolina, these are the requirements. You do have to be a US citizen. You have to be at least 18 in order to vote, but you can pre-register when you're 16 or 17. You have to have lived at your address in North Carolina where you're registering for 30 days as of election day, and then not currently serving the terms of a felony sentence. We definitely like to spend just a brief moment to make sure that that's very clear. We find that that's the biggest misconception that we hear from voters or potential voters. And so in North Carolina, you are allowed to register and vote, even if you are charged with and or convicted of a misdemeanor. That means you never lose the right to vote. For people who are convicted of a felony, they temporarily lose the right to vote. But as soon as you're done with that sentence, so that can include probation or parole, then you are eligible. And there's no extra step or extra paperwork or extra fine or anything like that. We hear all kinds of myths about this. So just want to make sure everyone is very, very clear on who's eligible. This is on all of our materials and our website. It's also on the voter registration form. So if you ever find yourself in a conversation with someone and you kind of need proof per se, just look at that voter registration form. It's at the very bottom. All right, so here's what we have to do this year. So this is a great new tool. We do have partial online voter registration in North Carolina. And so what You Can Vote has done is kind of add on to the process that exists. But fortunately, our North Carolina drivers, or DMV, partnered with our State Board of Elections to create an online portal. And so what we did is kind of add on to that and make it a little bit easier to use. If you go to youcanvote.org/register, you'll see the way to confirm and update your registration. And then there'll be kind of a choice point. So for people who do need to update their registration, they'll be asked if they know their full social security number and know their driver's license number if they have one. And if they can answer yes to both of those questions, they can do the whole thing online. And so it'll kind of it'll prompt you using this tool. You can't go forward without those numbers. So you can't really, mess it up or break it if you try to test it for yourself. But it's really fast, it's efficient. It's probably, a couple too many clicks for my opinion, but it is fairly easy to use. You can do this mobile, on your device, on an iPad, on a computer, wherever. It's really easy to use. And so that's really great news. We really want to be promoting voter registration because 2020 is such a odd year. The numbers, they're getting a little bit better, but they are not where we want to be. And so we know there are people who need to get registered to vote for the first time or to update their address. So keep in mind that you want to update your address every time you move, your voter registration address. So if you can be promoting this in emails, text messages, conversations, I'm going to talk about materials in a minute if you want to hang up some additional signs. We would love to keep promoting voter registration at least all the way through September, if not into October. We've got to get people registered to vote. One of the main reasons is that if you're registered to vote properly, you have access to the 3 different ways to vote. So we'll talk about that in a second. But in order to have access to each of those 3 options, you've got to get registered first. Let me briefly talk about folks who might not be a DMV customer. So that's someone who's eligible to vote, but they might not have a DMV license or non-operator's card. We have an extra step for that, and you can still register even if you don't have those numbers. So it's the same starting point. If you go to youcanvote.org/register, you'll put in your information like your name, your date of birth. And again, it'll give you that choice point of saying, do you have your DMV ID number or not? And if not, that's okay. You still put in your address, and you still put in your date of birth, and your residential and or your mailing address. And so you'll partially start the process. And then for folks who can't do it all the way online because they don't have a DMV signature on file, we will actually mail you that partially completed application. Our vendor, our tool online, and that will come with a stamped envelope that is pre-addressed to that person's Board of Elections. So we can at least start the process online. We can do most of the steps online, but because people still have to have a signature on file, those without a DMV card will have to do that second step. That is still free. That is still easy to use. You don't have to have a printer. You know, a lot of the barriers that we've seen in previous years about why voter registration can be hard is that they don't know which parts are required, which sections of the form are required, and or they might not have a stamp or the local Board of Elections address. So we've tried to take down as many barriers as we can. And so there is this option for anyone who's eligible. In terms of the timing, again, I want all of you to push this as much as you can for all of September for sure. The voter registration deadline is October 9th. And so that will be here before we know it. For some folks who have to do the second step of mailing it back and forth, there will become a moment when we might not want to encourage extra mailings back and forth. And so we will be updating our address, our website with how to go to early voting. And so that's the second part of what I want to talk about. But for folks who can't get registered by the deadline, or if it's it's close to the deadline, we can either offer them a paper form. If you have those in your office, you could get them from us as well, or your local Board of Elections. So you might not want to start the process online once we get into early October, just to make sure we're not missing anybody with that deadline. But you can also send people to early voting, because we still have same-day registration, which is a great tool for North Carolina. And so I'll talk about that in a second. But just very briefly, in terms of voter registration, there are tools online that are easy to use. This is quick, it's free, it's pretty painless. So I hope that you, if you didn't know about it, I hope you'll use it. If you have any questions, obviously we can take more questions towards the end. And quick note, it says on here, as it does on our website, but if you use this online tool, this is just for your voter registration. It doesn't change your driver's license address. So we get that question a lot from a lot of different people who say, oh yeah, I updated it online, I'm good to go. Well, let's double check and make sure, right? Let's verify that. But also doing the voter registration tool online doesn't get you a new driver's license with your new address. So those are two separate things. All right, quickly, what are we facing in 2020? I want to show you about a new tool that is really good in conversation with voters. I do have to briefly tell you there's no photo ID required in 2020. I never let an opportunity go by to tell people, because I know it's been back and forth in the news and people tend to cling to that sometimes when it is in the news. The fact is though, you will not be asked to show photo ID in 2020. That is true for in-person and vote by mail. All right, this is the tool that I want to just spend a couple minutes on. What we've done at You Can Vote is created a What's on the Ballot 2020 tool. Now, what I'm showing you right now is just kind of a screen grab of what you will see on our website. And I'm not going to click through every single one, but what I want to do is just kind of show you how to use this tool, and hopefully you'll be able to promote it. What we hear from voters all the time is, I don't want to vote, it doesn't matter, or nothing ever changes, or they just feel kind of disenchanted, right, or disconnected. And so we've created this 2020 What's on Your Ballot tool to help have a conversation with someone and facilitate a conversation. We do find that it's not as effective if someone tells you that they're not going to vote. It's not as effective if you fuss at them, right? It's not an effective form of communication if you shame them into why they have to. But if you can kind of flip it and pivot to, what issues do you care about? What are you concerned about? What things are you thinking about all the time that you're, saying that never change? Most of the time, it's one of these issues. This is not an exhaustive list, of course, but generally people can name either healthcare, education, civil rights, climate, or criminal justice, or all five of them. And so what you'll see on the website is each of these little Carolina blue buttons that say learn more. If you click on them from the website, it sends you to a fuller list of all the offices that people will see this year. You will notice once you click through that we're not focusing on the top of the ticket, right? Most people know, almost everyone knows that it's a presidential year, so they know about the federal elections. However, if we can bring people down ballot and start talking about the local and statewide offices that folks are going to see and talking about the power that those offices hold, it is a much more effective, communicative, and educational conversation that you can have with someone. So one example I'll just say about education, right? We talk to a lot of young people. We're doing the same kind of presentation in classrooms all across North Carolina for college students. When they're thinking about education and something that they might not know about, it's usually the superintendent of public instruction, right? And so you might know about that office, but I bet if you're having conversations with new and young voters or unlikely voters, that's not an office that gets a lot of attention. That's not an office that maybe they're not even going to have a debate this year between the different candidates. And so if you can bring up those kind of offices that hold a lot of power, right, that make a lot of decisions, without talking about the candidate, but we're just talking about the power of that office, that's a much more effective way to have that conversation. So this is linked in the doc that we shared at the beginning, and I'll share it around again, or someone can put it in the chat maybe towards the end. But I just want to highlight again that if you can bring people down ballot and talk about the way that the offices that you're going to see relate to their real life, we see a lot of people that want to participate. One other quick note that I'll just say about what you'll see on the ballot this year, depending on where you live, you'll see between 24 and 35 offices. So that is a lot, right? It's a 2 or 3-sided ballot, depending on where you live. There's a couple places that have some bond referendums. There's a couple places that have multiple offices or multiple seats of the same office. For example, the North Carolina Supreme Court, you get to vote for 3 of those people. So there's a lot to learn, right? There's a lot to look into. There's a lot to research. So I did add in here, oh, here's a full list. I went ahead and typed out the full list of some of the offices that you're going to see in 2020, but I've also included how to research some of these candidates. And so again, when you're having a conversation with a new voter or someone who might not be sure about voting, it's also good to keep in mind, you know, we are not telling them who to vote for. And, you know, I work at a nonpartisan organization. I know you do too. So I know you're not promoting who, but also giving people these tools about how to do the research is very effective, and will help them become a lifelong voter. Because if they have this tool to get registered, to look up your sample ballot, to research the candidates and what they stand for, to be able to identify which ones actually match with their values, that's going to help people kind of set them up to become a lifelong voter. When you can build these connections and see these connections, that's how we build lifelong civic engagement. Our work is not done in 2020. I hate to tell you, I hate to break it to you. All of the work that we're doing right now is building towards the municipals in 2021, then the midterms in 2022, then more municipals, right? It's an ongoing thing. And so when you think about a life of a voter, whether they're just coming into the process now, or whether they were a really active voter but have been disconnected for a while, giving people the tools that they need to actually cast a successful ballot is the key to helping make sure that they do that as a habit, a lifelong habit, continuously. I know I'm coming up on my time, so I'm going to stop talking. Again, this is my name, Caitlin Metzguer. You can vote with my email, and I'll make sure you guys have these slides and this information from the doc that we shared as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Lots of great information. Again, something we all have to think about is bringing people's focus down the ballot. That is so important. Thank you for that. Next, we have Cheryl Ellis presenting from Democracy NC. She'll be talking about voter protection and voter mobilization. Cheryl, I'm going to pull your slides up really quickly.
All right, thank you so much, and great presentation, Caitlin. Definitely that get down ballot. Just remember the Kool and the Gang song, Get Down on It, Get Down ballot. That just have that going through your head, because one thing, 30% of people don't vote down ballot, so it's really critical. And I know I just dove in because you all just don't understand how exciting a time this is for me. My name is Cheryl Ellis. Some of you may know me as Cheryl Carter Ellis. I am the organizing director at Democracy North Carolina, and I'm excited to be with you today to talk about voter mobilization and voter protection. So I know some of you may be at different stages in your planning, but I really wanted to talk about what are some of the components and things you should be considering as you're devising your plan. You want to think about who are the voters you're targeting, how many people are you planning to touch, what's your goal, and with that, it will inform what your tactics and how you're going to be able to touch them. Then you need to think about what's your capacity. Do you need to recruit volunteers to support your work? And then, of course, you need a timeline, because we do this in phases, and we do different tactics at different times. So I want to talk a little bit, piggybacking on what Caitlin talked about with voter education and registration, because we know due to COVID, our numbers around voter registration were lower. We do know, I believe it was July, August, the numbers were higher than 2016, but that does not mean we need to stop or slow down. We need to keep going full steam, because so many people since 2016, 2018 have either become 18, they are no longer an offender, they've moved. So we want to ensure that we're getting the new registrants and also updating people who need to have their registration updated. So you may be doing voter education and voter registration. One thing I do want to stress, if at any time you're combining voter ed and there's an issue component, you need to separate that from voter registration, because if you're doing voter registration and you're talking about an issue, it can be misconstrued that that particular issue is favoring one or another candidate. So you could have one person on one side that's doing the voter registration and the other person that's promoting an issue. So I wanted to make that really clear, because I would hate for someone to be out there doing great things and then to have someone bring that up as a stipulation. So some ways that we could do voter education in addition to providing the registration, we can use mailers, postcards. I know many of you have been working with Democracy North Carolina, writing postcards to the over 270,000 African-American voters in North Carolina that were purged. And also you can do letter writing campaigns, use social media, traditional media, letters to the editors and op-eds. And then Caitlin, as she mentioned, You Can Vote has resources. Democracy North Carolina has tons of resources. And we're also available to come and offer training. And then we're happy to also do train the trainer so that you can set up your own training. Now I want to talk a little bit about voter registration drives, because we all know voter registration is the first step to someone becoming a voter. But of course, it is not the last, as Caitlin mentioned. So if you're planning on doing voter registration drives, whether you're doing it safely offline or you're doing online, you really need to make a plan, thinking about where, when, how often. Make sure you have a plan to submit those forms, because the last thing that you want to happen is that on October 10th, you find a form for somebody that you registered, because that is considered them being disenfranchised. So make sure you have a system for how you're collecting all of those offline forms. And then, of course, with the online, as Caitlin talked about, doing that properly. One thing I do want to mention with the forms, especially online, only if someone's sitting side by side with you can you complete it for them, but they actually have to hit submit, because submitting is the equivalent of signing. The same way with if you're doing the paper form, you can complete the form, and I really encourage that because it takes out obstacles, but they have to sign the form. So it's real important, signing and submitting, the individual needs to do that. And you can come to our website, democracynorthcarolina.org, or you can vote, and we have all the do's and don'ts around a voter registration. But we want to make sure we follow up with these voters, because if we register 10,000 voters, but we don't have a plan to follow up with them, then we just have more people that are registered and they may or may not vote. And it's really important to know, as of 2018, we cannot copy voter registrations or copy anything from a voter registration. So we really stress and recommend that you pair that with pledge cards. Now I want to talk about that follow-up, the get out the vote. We hear GOTV so often. That is just such a popular acronym, but we want to make sure people really understand what GOTV means. So you've gotten the person excited, you've given them information, you've gotten them registered, and now we need to make sure we follow up. So like I said, using those pledge cards, or if you want to have, sometimes we use what's similar to a sign-in sheet, and we get people to pledge there. But again, we cannot copy the forms, but we definitely want to have some type of follow-up with those voters. And part of that follow-up is helping them to make a plan. And I'm going to go a little bit more into detail about what that means about making a plan. And then timing is key. I know so many of us have been so anxious, probably since April or May, but as we're thinking about engaging voters who maybe haven't been part of the process, maybe have been disenfranchised from the process, or they maybe are an ex-offender, they may be moving frequently. So we want to follow up with them as soon and as close to the election as possible. Because if you were to register someone in May and say they moved in August, that person needs to be re-registered. And if they don't know that, that could be an issue. But as what Caitlin said, we are ensuring and encouraging that everyone use early voting. That way, if there are any issues, they can take care of them then. So some of the ways that we're going to be following up, and we call these our voter engagement tactics: phone banking, texting, social media ads, traditional media, postcards, letter writing, and most definitely those nonpartisan voter guides and candidate information and mailers. And I do want to stress, when we're dealing with voters who don't participate as often, a couple of things that we've heard from them is that they don't necessarily trust partisan resources or candidates. So they are looking for nonpartisan information and trusted messengers to get the information out. So the nonpartisan voter guides, that is a perfect way. And as Caitlin mentioned, the statewide ones, actually, they are ready, and we will be getting those distributed soon. The ones that are county-based will be distributed a little bit later this month, but we will have those as well, and they will also be online. And excuse my husky, she always does this when I'm starting to talk and I'm not paying her attention. So now I want to talk about making a plan. And I just have to be honest with you all. When I first heard about this, I just wondered, we really have to make a plan. But truly, if we are working with people who don't vote frequently, or are new voters, it is really critical because voting is my life, it's my work. But for many people, you know, they are living, they're surviving, they have other priorities. So we need to help them with thinking through, and that's 17 days of early voting when they are planning to vote. And this increases their likelihood to vote. So we're thinking about October 15th through October 31st. They need to think about, is it going to be morning, noon, afternoon? Are they going to be going by bus? Are they driving themselves? They're riding with a friend? Are they taking a bike? Are they walking? And believe you me, it really does make a difference that you're asking these questions, especially when you think about working families and working people. They often may be taking the bus or they may be walking. So they really need to think through how they're going to get to the polls. And lastly, again, we want to ensure that we are providing them with a nonpartisan voter guide. Okay, now that we've gotten people mobilized and they're ready to vote, they've made their plan, we want to ensure that they can vote without any barriers, without any intimidation. So that's where our voter protection program comes into play. And this is such an important part of the electoral process. And Democracy North Carolina has run a voter protection program for many, many years. We've been joined by partners. And in 2016, Democracy North Carolina hosted the largest election protection on the ground program in the country, with over 1,000 poll monitors assisting voters in our major North Carolina counties and beyond. So there are a couple of components to this. We have volunteers, and we also offer many grants to organizations that want to adopt counties to protect. And this year, and I don't want to go into a lot of detail because there will be training for anyone who wants to do this, but we are going to offer a couple of options to our protectors where they can do non-contact. Well, all of it's going to be non-contact, but they can do things like being our roving vote protectors, or they can be protectors that are engaging in conversations, but we're definitely going to map out how they're going to do it and do that safely. And then we also have the hotline, which is staffed by voting rights experts, lawyers, and law students. And that number, and you're going to want to plug this in, is 888-OUR-VOTE. So some of the things that our vote protectors, also known as poll monitors, they do, they can eliminate voter confusion, they prevent voters from being turned away at the polls, they can identify voter intimidation or voter suppression, and you would be amazed some of the things that they may see. It could be something like there are police officers that are there. And I know some folks will feel, well, police officers are safe. Well, for some people, that could be intimidating. There could also be someone standing there, and I actually witnessed this myself, I want to say back in 2012. A lady was standing there telling people, this line is over an hour long. Are you sure you want to vote today? If you see or hear anything like that, even if you're not a vote protector, please call our hotline, because we do not want to turn anyone away or them to feel intimidated or their voice or vote being suppressed. Also, the things that vote protectors can do is notify the officials there and call our hotline. Say they've run out of ballots. We definitely need to make sure the hotline is aware, because we'll have our lawyers and people behind the scenes ask for more hours. And that happened back during the primaries up in northeastern North Carolina. And then lastly, they can identify and track any type of confusion or issues, and if there's a trend of that happening at certain polls. And then I just wanted to share with you, we have a one-pager that talks all about the Vote Protector program that you can go to our website, democracync.org, to get. And it just talks about our vote protectors being eyes and ears. I'm sure many of you have seen the people out in the yellow shirts. And we're actually going to have car magnets this year. We're going to have vote protector masks. We really are going to have what we say the bling for this program. So if you are interested in this program, you can reach out, and it's demnc.co/vote protector. And if you are with an organization that's interested in a mini grant to adopt a county, you can go to the link that's here. And I'm going to have all of this later. And of course, you'll be able to receive these slides so you can have all of the contact information. Now, lastly, I just want to tell you about some of the things that we're doing at Democracy North Carolina and how you can plug in. We have regional managing organizers all across the state in 7 regions. So if you are interested in getting involved in the work that they're doing with our Get Out the Vote program and other things, feel free, and the link is right there. Also, in addition to our Adopt a County mini grants, we used to call them Adopt a Precinct, but it's now Adopt a County. We also have GOTV mini grants for organizations that are interested in doing GOTV work with us. And the deadline for that is September 15th. Again, we have the Vote Protector program, Adopt a County, and then something we've introduced this year because we realized with COVID is really going to take these peer-to-peer, family-to-family relational conversations to help people to vote. So we have the hashtag WeVoteSquad, where people are making a list of 5 or 10 people and actually following them from when they are registered and checking their status all the way through until they vote. And so if you want to sign up for that, please go to our website and you can sign up there, or you can email me because we are just really excited in addition to our phone banking and texting that we're doing. And with that, I want to thank you all. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. That's lots of great information. So much, so many things we can do to empower our clients as we engage them. Thank you so much for that. Next up, we have our very own Whitney Tucker, our policy director here at NC Child.
Thank you so much, and just let me know as soon as you see these slides. I'm sorry. They wouldn't actually let me control them, so.
Do you need me to pull them up?
We'll try again.
Okay.
Yes, please. As soon as I pull them up, it won't actually let me
okay.
advance forward.
All right.
And that is why we plan for this sort of thing.
That's right. That's right.
While Javane gets those slides up for the findings of the most recent county data cards, which are an engagement tool that NC Child creates and provides for every single county to give you a snapshot of how children and families are just faring in your county across 15 different indicators of child well-being. So we're talking health, education, economic stability, all kinds of different things that you can look at to see how things are going. The 2020 county cards were created ahead of COVID-19. So they aren't showing you what's currently happening, but they do give you an idea of how families in your county were faring before the pandemic hit that you can use as you talk to candidates or to other people in your community about the issues that you all are facing and about the things that you really want to vote around. And also in this year's county cards, in the back of them, we've included questions for candidates that you can use to kind of jumpstart your thinking as you're trying to engage some of those folks. So just jumping right in here, I figured I would start off with our state demographics so you would get a good idea as I talked about some of these overall figures, because we also create a county card for the state as well, right? So that you can pull up the North Carolina card and your counties and kind of compare back and forth if you'd like. Just to give you an idea of how our state demographics look for children. North Carolina has more than 2 million children, about 2.3, and nearly 1 in 3 of those kids is under age 6 during that really critical time of child development within that 0 to 5 period. So it is very important that if we're gonna make more investments that are good for kids, that we do it early, because a growing proportion of our kids are actually young children. And also, as you can see here, almost 50% of the kids in our state are non-white, and a little bit over 50% are white. Right, so as we look through some more of this data, and I talk about racial disparities in that data as well that might exist in your county, that's something you really want to pay more attention to, not only because we want what is best for every child, but also because depending on where you live, the majority of the children that you could be talking about when you talk about what's best for kids are likely children of color. Next slide, please. So food security continues to be a challenge statewide. 1 in 5 North Carolina children live in households that are food insecure. And what that means is a determination that's made by the USDA, and it's measured by lack of access at times to enough food for an active, healthy life for all household members, and it's based on the limited or uncertain availability of nutritionally adequate foods. So at its most basic, food security can really just be defined as consistent access to enough food for everyone in a home to live a healthy, active life. So food security is different, food insecurity is different from hunger, which measures personal discomfort due to food shortage. But that said, those terms are often used interchangeably because the practical difference for families between being hungry and being food insecure, I mean, it practically doesn't exist, right? So next slide. You can see here some of the highest rates of child food insecurity across North Carolina, and then counties with the lowest rates. The food insecurity metric is based on responses to a national food survey that the USDA sends out about the access and quality of food that's available in each household. It's worth noting as you look at these counties that have the highest and lowest rates of child food insecurity, that even in counties that have modest rates overall, there may still be a large population, so like a large number of children or number of families who are food insecure. For reference with this indicator, the North Carolina overall child food insecurity rate for the data year that's included in the 2020 county cards, which is 2017, that rate was 20.1%. And in the same year, the United States rate was 17%. So North Carolina overall has a much higher rate of child food insecurity than the country at large. But then you see that we have counties that have rates 26, 27, 28, 29% of kids in those counties are food insecure. I also want to highlight throughout, as I go through some of this data, the figures specifically for Guilford and New Hanover and Wayne counties, since you guys are CAN hubs. And I know that a lot of people on the call today probably are looking for data from your specific county. But I will say that Guilford, New Hanover, and Wayne were not among the counties with either the highest or the lowest rates of food insecurity for this year's cards. But the pandemic has very likely changed things for a lot of families. So just remember that these are a snapshot of how things were looking before COVID-19. All 3 of your counties were pretty much in the middle of the pack here. Guilford, your rate was 20.4%. New Hanover, you were at 20.1%. And Wayne, you were a little bit higher even at 23.5% of kids living in homes that were food insecure. Next slide, please. Closely related to food insecurity, for obvious reasons, is poverty. Even before COVID-19 hit, 45.9% of children statewide lived in households that earned at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. In 2018, which was the most recent data year when we pulled the data for the 2020 county cards for this indicator, that federal poverty level meant that a family of 3 was earning at or below $41,560. So that's 200%. That means twice that what most people consider to be in poverty, which is 100% of the federal poverty line. So it's important to note that while that 100% is generally referenced as in poverty, research really now suggests that the metric for determining the federal poverty line is outdated to the point that most families require an income that's about twice the federal poverty line just to meet basic needs like housing and childcare and transportation. That's why we at NC Child report children living in poor or low-income homes. Widespread job losses have meant that many more families are now sliding back into the high-risk category of living in poor or low-risk homes. That's concerning for 2 reasons. One is that we already had way too many children living in families without enough to meet basic needs. But secondly, there's just a cascade of traumatic events for kids that are more likely when they live in families that are struggling with poverty. Things like experiencing eviction, child abuse and neglect, parental depression and anxiety, food insecurity, the list really goes on. And we know that those experiences are becoming more common across the state, and any potential lawmaker should be willing and able to speak on the significant public policy investments that need to be made now and through recovery in order to try and keep more families out of dangerous territory. So while Guilford, New Hanover, and Wayne counties are not among the top 10 in the state in terms of high poverty or high rates of families living in poor or low-income homes, to be clear, that's really just a statement more on how rampant this issue is across North Carolina and not really about how well most counties are doing in tackling it. You'll see to the right on this slide that both Guilford and Wayne counties have higher percentages of children living in poor or low-income homes than the state average of 45.9%. Next slide, please. Health insurance is another thing that we highlighted on this year's county cards, and it is a big driver of poverty that's also really critically important to public health during the pandemic period. The rate of children without health insurance ranges across our state from a low end of 3% in Gates County to a high end of 19% of children in Graham County, and that was pre-COVID. Guilford, New Hanover, and Wayne all fall between those 2 figures, but toward the lower end, which is good. Unfortunately, as with most of the indicators of children's well-being, we do expect this to get worse over the pandemic period and into recovery. In the last few weeks, we know that hundreds of thousands of North Carolina families have lost their jobs and lost the health insurance that they previously received through those jobs. Research tells us that children are more likely to be insured and to go to well child visits regularly when their parents are insured, which makes sense. But the opposite is also true. Because so many people have lost health insurance recently and North Carolina has not expanded income eligibility for the Medicaid program, we're going to see a lot of new adults who are uninsured and likely a lot of newly uninsured children as well. This is very problematic because children need that regular preventative care throughout childhood to ensure that they're developmentally on track. Well child visits and immunizations have already dropped significantly since the pandemic began, which means that many children are not getting the vaccinations and developmental screenings that they need. This can have really painful and expensive personal consequences, but it's also just potentially disastrous for public health. It's also worth noting that a lack of affordable health care is linked to late prenatal care for women, also to low birth weight and preterm births for infants, which are the 2 main drivers of infant mortality. which we continue to struggle with in our state. So preparing to vote smart is going to mean considering whether your county's high infant or maternal mortality rates track right along with high rates of uninsurance for parents and children. I just really want to urge you all to not be afraid to ask candidates about their plan to get affordable health coverage to more families, especially in New Hanover and Wayne counties. New Hanover, the biggest change that you all saw in this year's county cards was an increase in the number of children without health insurance. That trend is likely to continue through COVID, and you're going to want to talk about what that means for children's health at the personal level and for public health writ large. And then in Wayne County, while you all saw slightly more women receiving early prenatal care in this year's county cards, you also saw fewer babies born preterm and fewer babies born at a low birth weight, but your infant mortality rate more than doubled from 5 to 11 deaths per 1,000 live births. And that is incredibly unusual. There were 18 infant deaths overall, and your problems seem rooted in a very serious racial disparity. I looked into the Wayne County data, and 10 of those 18 deaths were to Black mothers. The white infant mortality rate was 5.4 in the same year. The Hispanic infant mortality rate was 9.8, and the Black infant mortality rate in Wayne County was 19.0. Next slide. And now to wrap it up, just the final issue that isn't listed on this year's county data cards, but will have a really big impact on child and family well-being is the 2020 census. Exercising your right to vote is one way to protect our democracy, and ensuring that we have a full and accurate census count is another. They really track right alongside each other. The US Census is mandated in our Constitution to count all residents of the United States, and the census count is used to determine apportionment of US congressional seats among the states, and also to allocate just billions of dollars in federal funding that comes down to our state and to all the others based on how many people live here. Previous census results have shown that children of color, low-income children, and children in immigrant families are all at high risk of being undercounted. And so in our state, those children are also very likely to be under age 5. That's important because in North Carolina, the children who are most likely to be undercounted in the census are also those who stand to suffer the most when vital programs see reductions in their funding based on our state census count. Those programs include Medicaid, SNAP, foster care, the National School Lunch Program, in addition to just more general state needs like highway planning and maintenance, which we also receive funding for. And the Census Bureau has not yet received permission from Congress to extend their usual data collection and reporting deadlines, despite the impact of COVID-19. So we only have until September 30th to get every person in North Carolina, including every child, counted in the census. So I want to remind you that as you're coming up with your plans to vote, to make sure that you have already completed your census and reminded your friends to do that as well. Final slide, please. So if you haven't filled out your census form yet, do that today. In fact, I'm encouraging you to do it online right now and to tell everybody that you know to do the same. It is very fast and it's going to have a huge impact on our state and your community for the next 10 years. I've included how to respond right here on the page. And with that, I am finished and open to questions.
Thank you so much, Whitney. Thank you. All of those issues are issues that we can be asking our candidates about. All candidates see where they stand on it. And then, as Whitney said, we all need to make sure that we have filled out the census and told friends and family to make sure that they have filled it out too. We'll take some questions and answers or questions at the end. Thanks again, Whitney, for sharing all of this with us. So now I'm going to jump in really quickly. We have 5 minutes before our hour is up, but I do want to get to some nonprofit do's and don'ts before we start our question and answer segment. Let me pull up those slides really quickly. So as we've heard so many great bits of information, as I said, if you have any questions, please leave them in the Q&A box, not in the chat, so that I can go back and make sure that I get to as many questions as I can. But we've heard about voting down ballot. We've heard about voter protection, who to look for, what number to call if you have any issues when you're at the polls. We've heard about issues in our state around health insurance and poverty and food insecurity. So at this point, we are really, or at least I am, we all should be pretty amped to get out and get this work done. But we want to make sure as nonprofits that we do it appropriately so that we can be above reproach, so that we can be as effective as possible. Really quickly, some do's and don'ts for nonprofits. It's pretty easy. Sometimes there can be some gray area, but we'll start with the things that we cannot do as nonprofits when engaging our clients and members in voter activities. We cannot endorse candidates. We cannot rate or rank candidates or tell people who to vote for. Many times, since we are trusted messengers of nonpartisan information that people are really searching for, they may even ask us in conversation, well, who do you vote for? Or who do you think would be good for these issues that we just talked about? Even though we have that trusted relationship, we still have to make sure that we draw the line there and say, well, I can't tell you who to vote for, but you can ask these candidates these questions we talked about. Or if we have a candidate forum, which is something that a nonprofit can do, if they invite all candidates, encourage our clients and members to bring these questions before all those candidates at that forum. Again, we don't want to endorse any one candidate or even ask a question that's so pointed it kind of shoeholds a candidate into one way that is yay or nay on an issue that we're passionate about. We want to keep them broad, those questions broad, and make sure that we engage all candidates equally. Some things that we can definitely do is, just as Caitlin gave us all those points on how we can educate our voters. Voter education is a charitable act that any nonprofit can take part in. You can distribute sample ballots and continue in the issue advocacy that you're already that you're already doing in your agencies. Voter registration is something that nonprofit organizations can definitely do. Some things that we should do as nonprofits is integrate voter engagement into the fiber of our culture. Everything that we're doing from here on out, if we plan on engaging voters, should include some element of education or mobilization. We should make sure that all staff are motivated to engage clients. Your forward-facing staff, people that greet people on a daily basis, make sure that they have some information that they can share with your clients to empower them and motivate them to vote in this election. And then encourage staff to vote too. Sometimes we can get complacent or get really focused on the direct work that we do with our clients. But part of empowering our clients is also getting out and making sure we're doing everything that we're asking them to do. And voting and making a plan to vote, as Cheryl talked about earlier and Caitlin mentioned as well. At NC Child, we have a Vote for NC Kids toolkit that we want to share with you all. And in this toolkit, you will find messaging for social media. You'll find great images that you can use with that messaging in our graphics folder. And then also some additional resources and learning that you can share through social media as well. Be sure to follow NC Child on social media with these handles on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And as you'll see in this toolkit, which is linked in the chat, we have a great timeline of key dates, that you'll be able to reference as we go about election season, things like National Voter Registration Day and the deadline for voter registration. And we also have the start of one-stop early voting, just a great timeline for you to reference as you do your voter engagement work. We have messages that you can share via Facebook or Twitter on absentee voting, if you're formerly incarcerated, how to register, great messaging that you can use with your clients and that people can share. And that's what we want to continue to come back to, especially in this time of COVID, where we're not doing as much in-person communication. When people can go on social media and see that you've shared something and then they share it, it's a great way to spread the word on what people can expect in the upcoming election season and what they can do to make sure that they get out and that their friends and family get out to vote. At the end of this toolkit, we have some things on election protection, rides to the polls, and again, we have some great information on from Nonprofit Vote on the countdown to the election, some resources from their resource library, and a great little piece on 10 things to do from now until the election, just to give you a time frame, to give you some action steps to take as you move forward with your organization and nonprofit voter engagement. For our CAN members, we also have a training that we did with our participating organizations. NC Child, in our project, we are partnering with some local nonprofits across the state to do some voter engagement, that we are mobilizing people with pledge cards. So that's one big thing that I wanted to leave with you all today. Our pledge cards are a great way to mobilize people to go out and vote. On that pledge card, we have lots of information on making a plan, some great resources that can be used for people to get out and vote. We also have information that we take that we are able to follow up with people with email and text messaging. And our organizations are also going to be able to follow up with phone calls because of this pledge card. It's a really great way, as Cheryl mentioned earlier, to maximize your voter registration efforts and make sure that people are getting to the polls. So at this time, and again, all of those things are linked in our chat. We also offer on our website a digital pledge card, and that's at ncchild.org/vote, where you can go on and make a digital pledge to vote too, which is great to have in this time of COVID, where some organizations aren't doing as much in-person contact, but can direct people to our website for that. So right now, we'll go on and open up the floor for our Q&A. And if you have put any questions in the chat, please go back and put them in the Q&A box so that I can make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, one question we have is, have you all heard if the multipartisan access teams, MATs, are going to be going out this year to long-term facilities or not due to COVID?
I can add on to what Cheryl typed in too, because it does depend on the county. And so I will just say that for folks who do want to work with the county MAT, the best thing to do is to reach out to them and get that request in. There is some kind of back and forth about safety protocols and making sure that everyone is safe. There was guidance sent out from HHS about how to work together and how to stay safe in this time, but it really depends on the county. And so that's certainly something that you should look into. If it's a possibility in your county, reach out to Cheryl or I, because we might have somebody on the ground in those counties. And I don't know, can everyone see the chat from earlier before they signed on too? I wonder if we should drop that in one more time, just copy and paste it.
Okay, we'll do.
Because I know there's more information to share too if folks want to get in contact.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'll drop those in the chat again. We also have one more question about our pledge cards. Stephanie says that she's received some pushback on pledge cards. Especially, she's one of our participating organizations, New Hanover County Council of PTAs, with the voter pledge cards. Some people are suspicious of where their contact information goes and how it is used. That is definitely a valid suspicion that people have when they're giving out that kind of information. But for NC Child Pledge cards, that information stops with us. We are solely using that information to be able to follow up with people and make sure they have credible information as they go forward in making their plan to vote. And we'll send reminders and things of that nature. But again, it stops with us. So they can trust that that information will be safe and used specifically for the purposes of following up until Election Day. Any other questions? I think we have another question from Stephanie. With the digital pledge cards, how are we sure the people actually complete it versus filling out the hard copy and returning it personally to you? So with the digital pledge card, all of that information is saved on our database. So we have the same fields on that digital pledge card as we do on the paper pledge card. So we make sure that we have the proper follow-up information. And we do have the area from where the pledger is, where they've come from. So again, no need to worry about the security of that process. Any other questions?
Hey, Javane, we had a couple people ask if the slides and recording will be available. Is that something that you're planning on sharing?
Yes, we can share the slides and the recording as well. Thank you. Well, great. Again, we are so grateful for your time. We're a little bit over, but I am so grateful for our panelists that joined today, Caitlin, Cheryl, Whitney. Thank you so much for the great information. Thank you for your time. Please, for our attendees, if you have any more questions, reach out to any of these women who would be able to steer you in the right direction. Reach out to me. If you're interested in getting pledge cards for your organization, I would love to help you with that. Please email me. Again, I'll drop my email in the chat and let me know how many you want and where to send them. Again, I'm trying to copy and paste into the chat as I talk, but here we go.
I see one question that was put in the chat box now. It says, does it show up anywhere that a participating organization helped to get people to fill out the cards? I think, oh, it looks like it went away. So I guess your question.
Sorry, Whitney. I answered that one. I just let her know that she can email me and Javane to work out a system for reporting people that they get to do the pledge cards without sharing personal information.
Perfect.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you. Okay, great. Well, I hope everybody has a great evening. I hope to be hearing about your efforts in engaging voters. Again, thanks everybody for signing on tonight, and we'll be in touch. Everybody take care. Thank you.